She knocked just past midnight, holding a small suitcase and a request. I wasn't ready for her. 2 kids stood behind her in pajamas, half asleep against her legs, and the porch light buzzed over all of them. She said she needed a husband by Saturday morning, and she said it the way someone says a prayer they're not sure anyone is listening to. I'm the quiet neighbor, the widower, who fixes things for other people and comes home to an empty house. So I should have sent her away. Instead, I stood there in the doorway and felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 3 years. The pull to be needed by someone again. I opened the door wider than I meant to. That's the thing you do when someone's children are involved, and the cold came in with her. Charlotte looked up at me, and I could see she'd been crying for a long while, the kind that's finished with noise and moved on to just shaking. Maya had her face pressed into Charlotte's coat. Leo was out cold against her shoulder, his small fist closed around a strap. The suitcase sat at her feet like it weighed more than it should, and the porch light made everything too bright and too sharp. "Can I come in?" she said, and it wasn't really a question. It was more like she was asking permission from herself. I stepped back. I always stepped back for people. It was the thing I did instead of talking. And that night it let her walk past me into the only room that had held another person's voice in 3 years. She sat Leo down on the couch, on my father's old quilt. The one I'd stopped noticing was even there. Maya curled up next to him without being told. In 10 seconds, my living room looked like a place where children slept, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. Let me give you the picture of who was standing in my doorway that night, because without it, the rest of this won't make sense. I'm Daniel, 34, and I build cabinets and fix porches for a living. Work that keeps your hands busy and your head quiet. 3 years back, my wife got sick, the slow kind, the kind that gives you time to say everything, and then time to wish you hadn't said some of it. After she was gone, I let the quiet settle over the house like a second roof. I didn't leave town. I didn't fall apart in any way people could point at. I just stopped letting the rooms hold anyone but me. The workshop out back kept me fed, and the neighbors kept me in small jobs. The years folded over themselves so quietly that I stopped noticing they were passing at all. Charlotte was the woman next door, and that's all she'd been to me for 2 years. A wave over the fence, a nod when I passed her car in the morning. She had black hair she always pulled back quick, tired eyes, and one of the kids on her hip more often than not. I'd noticed her the way you notice weather, something that was just there until she wasn't just there anymore. She was standing in my kitchen asking me for something I couldn't yet say out loud. "The kid's grandmother is trying to take them from me," she said, and her voice broke on the word take, like it had a sharp edge. "She says I'm not stable enough. She says a single house isn't a real home, and there's a review on Saturday. I think if I had a husband by then, if the house had a father in it, they'd have to see it different." I didn't say anything. I'm good at not saying anything. It was the trade I made with myself after the funeral. Silence for safety, and most nights it holds. But she was shaking in my kitchen, and her kids were asleep 10 feet away, and the thing she was asking me was so large and so strange that my silence felt like a different kind of answer. The rain had started up again, outside, the soft kind that taps the windows like it's asking to come in. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at nothing. I watched her wrap both hands around the mug I'd poured her, like it was the only warm thing left in the world, and I thought about how strange it was. I knew the wobble in her kitchen chair and the sound her screen door made, but not a single true thing about her life. 3 years I'd lived next to this woman, and I'd kept her at the exact distance I kept everyone. Just close enough to be polite and just far enough to stay safe. Now she'd crossed that distance in the middle of the night, carrying everything she owned in one small bag. I understood, without admitting it yet, that she wasn't going to be easy to keep at arm's length anymore. She told it to me slow, the way you tell a thing you've been carrying alone too long. I didn't interrupt, because I'd learned that silence could be a kindness too. Her husband had walked out 2 years before, left one Sunday for milk, and kept going. The kids had stopped asking about him around the time Leo started calling. Every man on television, Dada, his mother, Ruth, had never forgiven Charlotte for it. Or maybe she'd never forgiven her son, and aimed it at the nearest woman, because grief will pick a target if you let it. Ruth had money and a lawyer who wrote letters for a living, and the letters said Charlotte's home wasn't stable. Said she worked too much. Said the kids needed a two-parent house and a steady roof over their heads. I know how it sounds, she said, and she looked at me, then really looked, the way people do when they're about to admit the desperate part. I know a ring doesn't fix any of that. But the review is Saturday morning, and the woman coming to check is going to look at whether the house has a father in it, whether there's someone steady there. She paused and turned the mug in her hands. I could see her weighing whether to say the next part out loud. I can't become a different person by Saturday, but I could be married. I sat with that for a long minute. Outside, the rain found the gutter I'd been meaning to fix, and it dripped in a rhythm that filled the gaps she left between her words. I thought about the promises I'd made myself and the months after my wife died, the small ones that had hardened into walls. Never again, never let anyone count on you, never be the person someone loses. I'd kept every one of them, and the house had stayed quiet, and the quiet had stayed safe. I'd told myself that was the same thing as being fine. And here was a woman telling me that someone counting on me might be the thing that saved her kids. The terms, I said, because my hands needed something to do and words were cheaper than wood. What are the terms? Just on paper, she said, fast, like she'd rehearsed this part 100 times on the other side of my fence. Temporary. We marry. We live in the same house for the week. So it's real if anyone checks, and after the review we end it. I'll pay for whatever needs paying. You go back to your life, and I go back to mine, and the kids never have to know it wasn't, real. She said that last word the way people hold a hot cup, careful, like it might burn her if she gripped it too tight. And I noticed, right then, something I'd walked past 100 mornings without seeing. The porch light at her house had been burned out for weeks, the little one by the front door. I'd kept meaning to offer to fix it the way I fix things for everyone. I'd kept not offering, because offering would have meant crossing the fence I'd built between us. I filed it away without knowing I was filing it away, the way you do with the small things that turn out to matter more than the big ones. From the couch, Leo murmured something in his sleep and turned his face into the quilt. The small sound of it did something to the air in the room that all her reasoning hadn't been able to do. She'd laid out the logic like a woman who'd practiced it in the mirror. Husband equals stability equals keeps her kids. The logic was thin enough that we both knew it, thin as the wall between our two houses. But the boy sighing in his sleep wasn't logic. That was just a child who needed a roof and a person to be there on Saturday. I'd spent 3 years with a roof and no one to be there for. And the math of that started to look like the worst bargain. I hadn't said yes, but I hadn't said no either, and for a man who'd gotten very good at saying no, the silence between us was already leaning the other way. I said yes the next morning, quiet, the way I say most things. The relief that moved across her face was so big it almost embarrassed her. She tried to thank me, and I waved it off, because thanking would have made it heavier than I could carry. I already felt the weight of it settling onto my shoulders like a second coat. I told myself it was just a week. I told myself a man could stand anything for a week, even the sound of someone else's life moving through his rooms. Friday was a blur of paper and signatures, a day that doesn't feel like a wedding and isn't supposed to. We went to the courthouse in the morning with the kids in the back seat eating crackers into the upholstery. An officiant I'd never met said the words, while Maya stared at the ceiling fan and Leo tried to eat a crayon. Charlotte signed her name next to mine on a line that meant more than either of us was ready to say out loud. And then we were married, just like that, in the most ordinary room in the world. For the review to hold, we had to live under one roof, and we both knew it without having to say it. Her house was the one in question, the one Ruth had photographed and picked apart in her letters. So we agreed. She and the kids would come to mine for the week. Mine was quieter, steadier, a place that already looked like someone had lived a long, careful life in it. She packed what the kids needed and left the rest. By Friday evening, her coats were on my hooks and her shoes were by my door, and a house that hadn't held another person's belongings in 3 years was all at once full of someone else's weather. That first night I lay in my own room with the door shut, listening. Through the wall I could hear Maya talking, Leo down from some dream, the low patient voice of a 6-year-old who'd learned to be the steady one. Then Charlotte murmuring something soft that made them both go quiet. I'd forgotten what a house sounded like when it held more than one set of breathing. Or maybe I hadn't forgotten. Maybe I just trained myself not to hear it. The ache that came up wasn't the old grief. Not exactly. It was something next to it, something with a door I'd kept locked. That night the door wasn't locked anymore, and I lay there letting the sound of them fill the room I'd kept so carefully empty. I didn't sleep for a long time, and for the first time in 3 years, not sleeping didn't feel like a punishment. Saturday morning, the first full one, broke the quiet of my house into pieces. I didn't know it had. Leo was up with the sun and into the kitchen before I'd finished the coffee. He dragged a wooden truck across my floor with a sound like a small earthquake, while Charlotte chased him with a bowl and an apology she kept aiming at me. Maya sat at the table watching all of it with those careful, grown-up eyes, the ones kids get when they've spent too long paying attention to whether the adults are okay. I poured her a mug of milk and she said thank you, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. Something about her politeness made me sadder than the noise. Charlotte tried hard to keep it businesslike that first day. I could see the effort of it in the way she moved, every gesture a little too formal, like a guest who'd been told to act natural. She called it the arrangement twice and thanked me 3 more times than was necessary. She kept to her half of the house the way you keep to your side, of a shared bed, polite and careful and a little afraid of touching. I understood it. She'd built a wall around the plan to keep herself safe, the same way I'd built one around my quiet. 2 walls make for a cold house, no matter how warm the people inside them are. But I do this thing I always have, where my hands start fixing before my head gives permission. By noon, I tightened the wobble out of the kitchen chair without thinking about it. I made too many eggs, because 2 kids eat more than you'd guess. I lifted Leo up to the high window so he could see the bird on the wire. None of it was part of any arrangement. I wasn't trying to be a father. I was just being a man in a house with children in it, and the muscle memory of that turned out to be deeper than 3 years of silence. By the second night, Leo had figured out that the cabinet under the bathroom sink was low enough for him to reach, and he pulled every towel onto the floor while I was running his bath. I laughed before I could stop myself. It was a strange sound in that house. I hadn't heard it come out of my own mouth in a long time. Charlotte appeared in the doorway and caught me kneeling in a pile of towels with her dripping boy. She didn't say anything. She just leaned against the frame and watched us like she was memorizing it. Maya was the one who thawed first, the way the careful ones always do. Once they decide you're safe. She came to me in the afternoon with a drawing of a house with too many windows and a stick family out front, too tall and too small. She held it up without saying anything. I took it and pinned it to the fridge with the magnet shaped like a fish. My wife had put there years ago, and that I'd never been able to bring myself to move. I didn't think about what it meant that another child's drawing was going up next to where hers used to hang. Charlotte watched me do it from the doorway, and I caught the look on her face before she could arrange it into something safer. A look that said the wall around the plan had just got a crack in it. That evening, after the kids were down, we sat at the table with mugs, and the house got almost easy for a few minutes. An ease that sneaks up on 2 people who've been polite all day. She told me about the job she was trying to hold on to, and the sitter who'd quit last month. I told her about a porch I was rebuilding for an old man in town. For a little while we were just 2 tired people talking at the end of a day. Then she caught herself. I saw the moment it happened, and she pulled back to her side of the table and said she should sleep. The easy part folded up and put itself away. The next morning, Charlotte asked if we could sit down and write out the rules. She said it like a woman who'd learned the hard way that the unwritten things are the ones that hurt you. So we sat with a notepad between us and made it plain, the way you make a thing plain when you're afraid of it. We wrote down separate rooms, no real affection behind closed doors, and that the marriage ends the minute the review is over, plus the rule she underlined twice: no one falls for anyone. I agreed to all of it, and she agreed to all of it, and we both signed the notepad like it was a real contract. Then we put it in a drawer where neither of us looked at it again. The trouble with rules like those is that they turn every small thing into something loud. When you've told yourself you can't touch someone, the brush of a hand reaching for the same dish towel starts to sound like a shout, and you start counting the times it happens. I caught the scent of her soap on the hallway air one morning and stood there a second too long. She looked up and caught me standing there and looked away. Neither of us said a word, but the hallway held it for the rest of the day. A house gets very small when 2 people are trying not to notice each other in it. The almost moment came late one night, the one I keep coming back to when I think about this whole week. I came out for water and found her at the table, with the lights off, crying in that finished way again, the shaking kind. She was holding her phone like she'd just read something that took the ground out from under her. It was a letter from Ruth's lawyer, another one. And it didn't matter what it said. The shape of her told me she'd already decided she was going to lose. I didn't try to fix it with words. I've never been good at that, and she didn't need it. I just sat down in the chair next to her and stayed. The way staying is sometimes the only real thing you can offer a person who's sure they're alone. After a long while, she leaned over and put her forehead against my shoulder, just rested it. There, I felt her breathing start to slow down and find a rhythm again. Neither of us said anything, and she didn't cry anymore. After a few more minutes, she straightened up and said she was sorry and went to bed. I sat at the table in the dark for a long time after. There was no kiss, and there was never going to be a kiss. That was the rule, and we'd both signed it. But the weight of her head on my shoulder stayed with me into the next morning like a handprint I couldn't wash off. And I knew, in the part of myself I'd been ignoring all week, that I wasn't pretending anymore. When I was gentle with her kids, I wasn't pretending when I was careful with her. She found the signs before I ever meant to show her, because a house holds the shape of what you've lost, whether you want it to or not. It was the photo turned face down on the shelf that she noticed first. Then she saw the room at the end of the hall I'd asked the kids to stay out of, and the way I'd go still and quiet whenever a certain song came on the old radio in the kitchen. She didn't push. She just left space for it, the way she left space for everything. On the fourth night she asked me, soft, in the voice you use on someone you're afraid of scaring away, whether I wanted to tell her about the woman in the picture. So I told her, the way you tell a thing at a kitchen table when the kids are asleep and the house is dark and the person across from you has already seen you at your worst. I'd married young, too young maybe, but right, the kind of right where you build a whole life around a person and then forget there was ever a version of you before them. We'd had this house and the workshop and a plan for kids that the slow illness ate before it ate her. I told Charlotte about the chair that still had the dent from where my wife used to sit and the coffee mug. I couldn't bring myself to move for a whole year. I told her about the night the house went quiet and just stayed quiet, like a bell that had been rung once and then never again. I told her about the morning after, too, the one I don't talk about. I had made 2 cups of coffee out of habit and stood in the kitchen holding the one she'd never drink. A neighbor found me like that an hour later, still standing, still holding it, and she took it gently from my hands without a word. That was the day I started keeping the house quiet, because quiet didn't make 2 cups by accident. She listened to all of it without looking away. When I finished, she didn't tell me she was sorry the way everyone else did. She just sat with it the way I'd sat with her the night before, and then she said the thing that turned the whole week on its side. She said she'd been feeling guilty all this time for asking a man who was still grieving to take on her mess. She'd thought I'd said yes out of pity, and now she understood that wasn't it at all. I said yes, I told her, because I know exactly what it is to lose your whole world in one quiet stretch of days, and because her kids' laughter had already started filling the room I thought I'd die inside of. She cried a little, then, not the shaking kind, the kind that comes when something you've been holding too tight finally lets go. I told her she hadn't taken a single thing from me. I told her she'd woken something up that I'd buried on purpose, and that being woken up hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that means you're still alive. After that, we weren't 2 strangers with a notepad in a drawer anymore. We were 2 people who each knew what it cost to lose the ones you built your life around, and the arrangement between us started to feel less like a contract and more like a bridge we'd both been too stubborn to build from our own sides. Saturday comes in gray and early, a morning that can't decide if it's rain or just heavy air, and the house wakes up tight with the weight of it. Charlotte is rigid at the kitchen counter, a stillness that takes more effort than moving. I watch her check the kids' clothes for the 3rd time without realizing she's doing it. I pour her coffee and put it where her hand will find it. She looks at me with eyes that are asking a question her mouth won't form, and I just nod, because that's the only answer I can give her. That doesn't require words I'm not ready to say. I straighten the house the way I straighten a porch before an inspection, and I catch myself doing it and almost laugh. I'm treating a custody review like a job, and that should feel wrong, but it doesn't. Maya's drawing is still on the fridge, and I leave it there. Leo's truck is on the rug, and I leave that too. A house that's too clean looks like a house where children don't actually live, and the whole point of today is to look like a place where children live. Ruth arrives at 10, with her lawyer, a thin man with a briefcase and a smile that doesn't reach anywhere past his mouth. She walks through my door the way a person walks into a place they've already decided is a lie. She's polite, she's cool, and she's looking for the seam. The place where the marriage frays if you tug it. She asks how long we've been together, and Charlotte says the careful version of the truth. Ruth's eyes move to the kids to see if they flinch at it, and they don't. As far as Maya and Leo know, this is just where they live now, and the man in the kitchen is just who makes the eggs. The questions get sharper from there, the kind that are really accusations, dressed up nice. And Ruth watches how the kids are with me the way a jeweler watches a stone for flaws. She sees Leo reach for my leg without being told to. When he gets shy of the lawyer, she sees Maya climb into the chair next to me like it's the safest square on the board. I can feel her certainty starting to thin around the edges. When she pushes harder and asks me, point blank, what kind of father I think I am to someone else's children. The rehearsed answer I had ready just leaves. What comes out instead is the real one. I tell her about the wobble I took out of the kitchen chair and the bird on the wire Leo likes to watch, and the way Maya reads to her brother at night in a voice too small for the words she knows. I tell her I'm not pretending, and I say it looking right at Charlotte when I say it. The room gets very still. Ruth watches Maya's hand find mine without anyone telling her to. Something shifts in the older woman's face then. Not a surrender, she's too proud for that, but a doubt planted in the middle of her certainty, the kind that grows overnight whether you water it or not. The review ends, not with a verdict spoken out loud, but with a quiet diffusing, Ruth gathering her lawyer and her briefcase and her disappointment. The air in the house doesn't fully loosen until her car pulls away. Charlotte stands at the window until it's gone. Then her shoulders come down about 3 inches, and she turns around, and she's crying again, but this time it's the kind that means the ground has come back under her feet. The threat lifts, and the week did what it was supposed to do. Standing there in my kitchen with her kids, and her relief and her red eyes, I realize the part I was most afraid of is the part that's about to start. The days after felt like the silence after a song ends. That strange beat where you're not sure if you're supposed to clap or just sit there. We'd won, which meant the reason for the marriage was over, which meant the marriage itself was supposed to be over too. The logic of that was so clean, it should have been a relief to both of us. Charlotte got formal again over the next few days, the politeness coming back like a guest who'd been away. She thanked me in the careful voice that meant she was putting distance between us on purpose. She told me I could file to end it whenever I was ready, that she'd handle whatever paperwork there was, that she owed me more than she could ever say. Every word of it was a door closing softly. I told myself it was better this way, the way you tell yourself a thing, because the alternative is too frightening to look at directly. I was never supposed to keep them. That had been clear from the first knock. The arrangement had an expiration date stamped on it from the moment she said Saturday. A man who'd built his whole quiet life around not losing anyone again should have been glad to give the rooms back their emptiness. I tried hard to be glad, the way you try hard to feel something your heart has already decided against, but the dread had started. I'd catch myself looking at the hooks where her coats hung, or the fish magnet with Maya's drawing still under it, and I'd feel the quiet coming back the way you feel weather turning before the sky even changes. 3 years of silence had been safe because I'd chosen it. But the idea of going back to it now, after I'd heard what the house sounded like, with a family in it, felt less like safety and more like a sentence. I stood in my own kitchen one night and understood finally that the quiet I'd been calling my refuge had been quietly killing me the whole time. The only thing keeping me alive in it had been the sound of those kids through the wall. The first real crack came on a Tuesday. I came home from a job and found one of Leo's socks under my couch, a tiny blue thing that had no business being in my house. I stood there holding it like it was evidence of something I didn't want solved. A week earlier that sock would have meant nothing to me, just a piece of someone else's mess in my careful empty rooms. Now, it was the thing I couldn't bear to put in the laundry basket, because putting it there meant admitting they were leaving. I sat on the couch with it in my hand for longer than I want to tell you. I understood then that I'd already lost the argument with myself. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. Charlotte was scared too, though she hid it behind the thank yous and the formality. I could see the shape of her fear because it was the same shape as mine turned inside out. She was afraid to believe any of it had been real, afraid to need me, afraid that the man who'd been steady all week would turn out to be just another person who walked when it got hard. Her husband had taught her that people leave. 3 years of doing it alone had taught her that relying on anyone was the fastest way to get left. So she was packing up her hope before I could disappoint it. We circled each other for 2 days like that, both wanting the same thing, and both too scared to be the one who said it first. The house between us got colder by the hour. I come home on the 3rd day to find the suitcase open on her living room floor, the kids' things folded into it. In that careful way she has, I know, before she says a word, what it means. She's leaving before I can want her to stay, because she's decided that's the kinder thing, the thing that protects us both from the bigger hurt later. She's standing in her own kitchen, with her back to the door, and her shoulders are set the way they get when she's made up her mind about something sad. I watch her for a second before I do the only thing I know how to do. I don't make a speech. I've never been the man for speeches, and she wouldn't believe one anyway. Not from someone who'd spent 3 years proving he could live without her kind of noise. So I go around to her front porch, the one with the light that's been burned out for weeks, the one I kept meaning to fix, and kept not offering to fix, because offering would have meant crossing the fence I'd built between us. I get the new bulb from my truck, the one I've been carrying for a month, like an excuse I wasn't ready to use, and I fix it. It takes 2 minutes. I flip the switch. Her porch lights up for the first time in months, warm and yellow against the gray afternoon, and it says everything my mouth doesn't know how to. She finds me there, still on her porch, with the step under me and the light on behind me. She stops in the door frame and looks at the bulb and then at me, and her whole face just opens up. I tell her then, plain, the way I should have told her days ago, that it stopped being pretend for me somewhere in the middle of the week. And I don't know exactly where. I tell her the quiet almost killed me once, and I'm not going to choose it again. I'd rather try and fail with her and the kids 100 times than let her walk back into a dark house alone. She tells me she's terrified to need me, her voice cracking on the word need. I tell her needing someone isn't the same as losing yourself, and that I'm not the kind of man who walks. I say it knowing it's the first real promise I've made to anyone in 3 years. Maya and Leo appear in the doorway behind her, drawn by the light. Leo reaches for my leg, the way he does when he's shy of something new, and then he looks up and says something small and true that I'm going to keep for myself. Because some words a man earns and doesn't pass around, Charlotte kneels down and pulls both of them close. Then she reaches for my hand, and I take it, and the 4 of us stand there in the lit doorway of a house that was never supposed to be ours, and somehow already is. The family I married on paper to help her keep her kids turns out to be the family that kept me. The door I'd locked against the world 3 years ago is standing wide open now, with the light pouring out of it. That knock at midnight taught me something I'm still turning over, that the quiet we choose for protection can become the thing that hurts us most, and the bravest act is letting a family walk back into a house we'd sworn to keep empty. If my story warmed you tonight, leave a comment and tell me which moment got you the most. The next one's already waiting on the porch.